Hello everyone, my name is Lloyd, and today I will be talking about my research project, The Evolution of Zoomorphic Imagery and Embroidery Techniques in Qing Dynasty Rank Badges. A brief overview of what I will cover today. I will first provide an introduction to rank badges, looking at their historical context and their significance within the Qing Dynasty society. Then looking at my research questions and how I targeted and focused my research this summer, as well as my methodologies for how I approach this research. I will then get into my observations and conclusions regarding my research, including a brief introduction into an iconographic analysis, as well as an evaluation of the historical evolution, as well as briefly touching on the technological decline of embroidery techniques. Rank badges are textile insignias sewn or embroidered into the front and back of official robes. They depict a central creature in a scene with waves and sky surrounded by symbols of good fortune. They were first introduced formally in the Ming Dynasty, but then later standardized and formalized in the Qing Dynasty. However, the use of animals as symbols of status is also seen in earlier dynasties, such as the Yuan Dynasty led by the Mongols. To earn one of these badges, an individual would have to pass intense examinations and be granted permission by the emperor. The badges were symbols of status, intellect, and wealth. There were also variations in Korea and Vietnam, but for the purpose of this presentation, we will focus on the Chinese badges. In China, the wives and children of officials were also allowed to wear badges that mirrored that of their husbands. Today, the badges are popular within private collections, though some museums do have extensive collections, with Qing Dynasty civil badges being the most common, and Ming Dynasty badges, particularly that of military status, being less common. Within rank badges, there are 4 different categories: imperial, censor, civil, and military. Each is represented by a different creature. For imperial badges, it's a dragon, with the 5-clawed dragon representing the emperor. Censor badges were represented by a shiji, which was a mythological creature from Chinese folklore, which was associated with judicial fairness. The civil badges were represented by birds, and military badges being represented by mammal creatures and other mythological mammals. Within the civil rank status, there are 9 different individual ranks. Going in order from 1st rank to 9th rank, the animals' representations include a Manchurian crane, golden pheasant, peacock, wild goose, silver pheasant, egret, mandarin duck, quail, and paradise flycatcher. These ranks were changeable, and so at different periods during different dynasties, a different bird might have represented a different rank, but these are reflective of the late Qing Dynasty period, which is primarily what the collection at the JSMA consists of. The sketches next to the ranks within this table are reflected of Ming Dynasty designs for civil officers, and they're coming from an illustrated encyclopedia from 1603. Similarly to civil badges, military ranks were also divided into 9 different categories. Going in order from 1st rank to 9th rank, again, the animals and mythological creatures being represented were a chinlin. This was after 1662, but prior to that, it was a lion was 1st rank. Then 2nd rank being a lion, leopard, tiger, bear, panther or a rhino. For 7th rank, it was variable. Then 8th rank was a rhino, and 9th rank a seahorse. Prior to beginning my research, I established a couple of research questions in order to focus in my research and my motivations behind what I was studying. So my first question related to iconography, which was, what are the historical mythological origins of bird icons used in Qing Dynasty rank badges? And then what can these origins tell us about the mysterious selection of creatures for rank status? This question grew out of previous research I have conducted that established that, at least within Western scholarship, we do not have an understanding as to why certain birds have been connotated with scholarly pursuits. My second question worked from a more technical framework in wanting to establish what was the technical evolution of embroidery and tapestry techniques of rank badges during the Qing Dynasty. And then overall, I had an overall goal of evaluating and examining the collection of 55 rank badges located at the JSMA and ultimately creating a catalog for their collection for future use by classes and other scholars. I approached my research by first conducting a historical analysis and contextualization in order to provide a framework for myself around the context of rank badges, particularly in the Qing Dynasty, but also going further back in order to explore their origins. I then conducted a more specific iconographic study and look at the historiography of particularly bird icons within historical folklore, literature, and art within China, going back to ancient and medieval data. I then looked very specifically at individual iconography for the badges within the JSMA, looking at not only the central bird figures, but also the Buddhist symbols that surrounded them, as well as looking at microscopic imagery and performing a microscopic analysis of the badges at the JSMA with my faculty mentor, Professor Gasparini. I then would use all this data and perform a comparative analysis to determine a pattern and evolution of imagery and techniques. So now moving on into kind of the observations and results of my fellowship, I'm going to briefly touch on iconography. And while a large portion of the research was dedicated to analyzing the historical significance of specific iconographic imagery, I will only briefly touch on the results due to the scope of this presentation. The research of historical literature, folklore, and art provided a clear line that connotated an animal's symbolic significance to ancient and medieval mythological stories. Even when a story or belief has been lost, the significance and connotation remains, leaving behind a lasting cultural impression that influences visual culture. In addition to mythological origins, it is evident that centuries of imperial power used animals as symbols of power and status long before official rank badges appeared. For example, in medieval China, a man was able to assert his power or rise in status by killing a snake or a tiger. The human perception of dominance over animals for those they feared or for an alignment with those they revered manifested in societal teachings relating to status. To provide more context to this, I will briefly provide an example with the case study of pheasant imagery. And while I could give a full 30-minute presentation on the evolution of pheasant imagery within Chinese culture, I will briefly use the examples on the slide to explain a little bit about its evolution. On the slide, there are 4 rank badges, one being a phoenix representing a princess status, a golden pheasant, a peacock, and a silver pheasant. 3 of which exist within our earthly world, and the phoenix being otherworldly, but being said to have come from the golden pheasant or the peacock. The scholar Huayu Chen, in her novel In the Land of Tigers and Snake, Living with Animals in Medieval Chinese Religion, they identify an early medieval imagery of baby pheasants connotated with the outcast class of society. They were considered ugly and uncivilized. This led me to wonder, how did the pheasant go from being connotated with the lowest class of people to being an elite status? Chen argues that the emperor at the time utilized the idea of the baby pheasant as a symbol of power by civilizing the bird. In doing so, the imagery of the pheasant has evolved as a reflection of the emperor asserting his power over the lower class and establishing his ability to, quote, tame or to, quote, culture the lower class of people. The pheasant then evolves into new imagery with the silver pheasant, the peacock, the golden pheasant, and then even the phoenix being representative of some of the highest classes of people, thus reflecting the emperor's ideas of his power and ability to civilize individuals. Now, moving on from iconography, I will provide my observations and conclusions regarding the historical evolution of the badges. So the Qing Dynasty sees a greater form of regulation placed onto the badges in the sense of a standardized composition. By the 19th century, the badges of civil officers follow almost identical compositions with just minor variations in the symbols used. As the 20th century approaches, a pattern emerges where the badges rely heavily on excessive auspicious Buddhist symbols, which is a divergence from the Ming Dynasty badges that used very few symbols. The badges see stylistic changes that match the popular artistic styles of the emperor or the dynasty of the time, just as one might see with fashion. For example, in the badge below, there is a representation of a fourth-rank civil official with a wild goose design. It is dated to the period of the Qinlong Emperor, who favored a more landscape style and perspectival work due to his preference of European styles at the time. In another example, which is from the mid-19th century, we see the emergence of a new style with intricately filled scenes of numerous Buddhist symbols, floral motifs, fungi, and dragons, and symbols of longevity. In this particular example, we see a stylistic trend favoring what's the so-called forbidden knot, which is one of the most challenging embroidery knots to complete. While within the collection at the JSMA, we have 4 examples of this style was proved to be short-lived in popularity, likely due to the difficulty of its execution. However, the numerous amounts of symbols would be continued on after its popularity. Here are 2 more examples where we see an addition of a large number of symbols being used in the badges. In these examples, we see the more standardized style that is popular throughout the 19th century until the fall of the dynasty in 1911. The 2 examples below are an example of both the Kusi tapestry and a fully satin-stitched embroidered on silk. These follow the standard composition and color palette that many studios would have followed, and are an example of the radiating diagonal lines coming off the bottom, which would traditionally have been in the 5 traditional colors, but were oftentimes later depicted in gold, bronze, and silver, as in the example on the right. As you can see, the badges are filled with numerous Buddhist symbols and reflecting both the 8 auspicious Buddhist symbols as well as the 8 implements of the 8 immortals. As the Qing dynasty begins to face economic challenges, there are significant changes to the official examination. In 1843, in order to bring in additional revenue, the emperor allows individuals to purchase rank status. I argue that this is a turning point in the technological decline of Chinese embroidery of rank badges. Based on the collection in the JSMA and other publicly available collections, there is a clear decline in overall badge quality and technique. There is an adoption of methodology to allow for mass production with machine-made applique animals. At this time, there is a large increase in Kesi badges that allow for that follow similar patterns with details painted in rather than embroidered in. In addition, the styles become more westernized with excessive gold and non-traditional Chinese motifs that suggest they were made for a non-Chinese audience. That is to say, that they were made for Western collectors. The examples on the slides demonstrate an example of some of the shortcuts and changes that establish this shift. By placing it within the context of a declining empire, it is clear that the badges begin to shift in purpose and in meaning. With the ability to purchase them, did they hold the same value? Overall, we can establish a clear decline in overall quality that can be traced back to the changing examination requirements and shifting audiences. I would like to take this time just to thank and acknowledge my faculty advisor and mentor, Professor Gasparini, for her encouragement and guidance throughout this fellowship process. I would also like to thank Sujin Zhong, the postgraduate fellow at the JSMA, for all the time and support she gave me in accessing the collection. I would also like to thank Elizabeth Lohr and Jonathan Smith of the JSMA for their assistance and support in accessing and cataloging the collection. And last but not least, I would like to extend my gratitude to the University of Oregon Cure team for providing me with this amazing fellowship and allowing me to conduct this research, as well as their professional and academic guidance. Without this wonderful support, this project wouldn't have been possible. Finally, the references used for this research are listed below, should anyone be interested. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you all for listening.